Good afternoon, all. Welcome to the grand finale in an investment advisor conference that seems to have taken a subtitle of Fracture and Chaos. I think we'll take that as a compliment that we get to close this out. For those of you that have stuck around, our deal here is a social contract is we will try to make this valuable for you. We will also end on time, and we will distribute CLE codes appropriately. We talked a little bit about compliance and technology in terms of setting the stage here. My name is Kevin Ehrlich. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer at a shop called Western Asset Management Company. We're a fixed income institutional shop. I'm joined by two people that know an awful lot more than I do about compliance and technology, so we'll let them introduce themselves and we'll get on with the program.
Do we introduce ourselves as Fracture and Chaos?
We could.
I'm Chaos.
I'm both really. Fracture.
Hello, welcome everyone. We realize that we are the last thing separating you from departure, so we will try to make sure we end on time. My name is Melissa Gilbertson. I am a partner at Mars & Power and also the director of our technology and trading operations.
I'm Rich Sarhadi. I'm head of advice compliance at Vanguard, and I also am the chief compliance officer of Just Invest, a newly acquired entity by Vanguard that delivers direct indexing capabilities to advisors. So, got two jobs there.
Well, while we're up here, we're happy to entertain questions. So as we've done in some of the other sessions, look out for the note cards and send them up, and we'll make up answers as we see fit. But we want this, as I said, this to be practical and pragmatic, so we're happy to entertain questions wherever we can. But we want a level set to begin with. So Melissa, why don't you see if you can get us started with a little sense of who's stuck around.
Great, so we have 3 polling questions, and since we don't have digital polling in this technology panel, we're gonna go old school. So what I'll do is I'll read the question and the answers and then go back and ask for your responses. So first is, what is the size of your existing compliance departments? Are you A, more compliance people than you know what to do with? B, comfortable, busy, but not drowning? Or C, you are the sole survivor? So are you A, B, and C? We have a lot of sole survivors. Thank you in the back.
It's a compliance support group here.
Our second question is, what best describes the compliance culture in your firm as it relates to technology initiatives? It is A, we have a seat at the table. In fact, we're at the head of the table. B, we are included in conversations, but only if we ask. Or C, we are rarely consulted in advance and sometimes not at all. Are you A? Nice. B. And C. All of those sole survivors are also rarely consulted. I see a theme back there. And the last question is, what is the structure of your existing technology offerings? A, we rely solely on vendor software and do very little customization within our firm. B, we generally rely on vendor-created software, but do have some internal development programming expertise to customize solutions. Or C, we are really a fintech firm in disguise and develop all of our own automations and APIs. So are you A, B, some vendor but do customization, and C for the fintech firms out there? All right. I'm glad to see that the sole survivors in the back are also not the fintech firms, so that's good. Thank you.
Well, very good. As I said, this is a social compact, so I'll give you an element of good faith, and we'll start with one of the code words immediately. Ready? Hercules slew the Hydra, multi-headed Hydra, that was protecting the entrance to the underworld. So your code word is Hercules. I'm not saying there's an analogy, but remember, this is Fracture and Chaos. I'm going to start with a quote here. Chair Gensler had some comments in January this year that talked about a little bit of perspective from him. So I just want to read this. I think it frames up a little bit of the topic and shows you a little bit of where he's thinking and where the commission is likely viewing the use of technology these days. And he goes to say, quote, "To me, the most dramatic change in our markets is the use of predictive data analytics and artificial intelligence. Predictive data analytics, including machine learning, are increasingly being adopted in finance, from trading to asset management to risk management. Though we're still in the early stages of these developments, I think the transformation we're living through now could be every bit as big as the internet was in the 1990s. Period, end quote. Now, your shop may not be big into machine learning or AI, but that gives you a sense that a regulator is concerned and thinking about how transformative various technologies and various tools might be to the asset management business and the capital markets writ large. So we want to talk a little bit about how shops use compliance and how we as a compliance program can engage with them and not only just keep up, hopefully we can add some value. One of the things that we were thinking about is you can think of this a little bit as a framework of defensive and offensive. As a compliance professional, there's things that you need to do out of just pure defense. You need to keep up with what's going on. You need to hopefully prevent bad things from happening or prevent your firms from getting in trouble. There's some offensive things you can do personally as well as to proactively identify some of those risks. But then there's also some proactive things and offensive things you can do to use your own technology to accomplish your goals. So if you think about it through those kind of frameworks, that's a different way to think of it. We're not going to do a deep dive into cyber, but cyber is always lurking around the corner. It is a risk, and one of the benefits that a compliance professional can do is issue identification. Say, hey, before we do this, we should check on that. And one of the that's is cyber, so we'll put the placeholder down there. We're probably going to talk a little more about supervision, a little more about governance, a little more staying plugged in. A little bit of being involved and engaged. So if you really had to take away one theme of this, it really is making sure that the compliance function is involved and engaged in the various technology initiatives that a firm has. There is a broad spectrum of what you as an individual can do. There's a broad spectrum of what an individual advisor can do. As we saw from the polling, some people are doing it themselves, some people are using vendors. Some shops obviously have more resources than others. Some compliance professionals have more technology skills than others. Some business models rely more on technology than others. Some business models use technology to interface with clients. Some business models really use technology to arm their professionals to be able to do their jobs more efficiently and effectively. So there's a lot of different dimensions. I'll also, before I forget about it, also call your attention to some of the materials that you have in your conference materials. There's a bunch of things in there to give you some flavor of some technology. You'll see in there the speech that I just quoted from Chair Gensler is in there. The SEC request around digital engagement practices is in there. There are copies of the settlement cases with AXA and Transamerica, which involved the use of quant strategies and how those went off the rails a little bit. And there's some IM guidance in there about robo-advisors. So one of the things that if you're looking to get value out of this conference, whether it's from our panel or not, make sure you go back and read the materials. There's an awful lot of good stuff in there. And so I just want to make sure to not miss drawing your attention to that. But it's all about knowing your business model and knowing your risks. So now that I've taken up all the oxygen in the room, I'm going to get out of the way and let the people that really know what they're doing and are most involved in this on a day-to-day basis. We might make this a little more of an organic dialogue type of a panel, but we'll see how it goes. So we're going to talk a little bit about how technology and the technology is used in organizations, how compliance engages with that, workflows, governance. So I'll turn it to the two folks sitting next to me. Have you figured out who's Fracture and who's Chaos?
I think I'm Chaos.
You're Chaos? Okay. All right. We'll start with Chaos first, just because you're closest to me. Why don't you start and tell us a little bit from your perspective what you think?
So for us, being a firm of about 46 people and relying very heavily on the third-party vendors for our technology solutions, we have both, the business units, we've got compliance, and we've got the technology IT department. And what's really important for us from an offensive perspective is to make sure that we're all partnering together. I think it's important to highlight that there are probably no two better departments within your organization that understands horizontally across your business. I think compliance and technology, particularly when partnered together, can really come together and provide really meaningful and thoughtful engagements around the use of technology.
I agree. We at Vanguard have, we're larger, obviously. We build a lot of our own stuff. We have a whole organization dedicated in our advice business to building advice technology or a fintech division. And so for those firms that have that or are customizing technology, you have to have a seat at the table. You're a stakeholder in this as well, and you do have a horizontal view of the business as a compliance professional. We have to. We have to know about the advice business that we provide, whether that's digitally like we do at Vanguard or digitally enhanced with human beings providing the advice. You have to know trading. You have to know the risk components. You have to know all of these factors. And I think if you have a seat at the table when you're developing technology or you're building or you're buying technology, you can adequately assess the risks from the beginning. And one of the things that we try to do is get in at the beginning ideation phases of when technology is, these technologists are thinking up the next big fintech tool that we're going to provide, so we can, understand what they're trying to do, and then really kind of advise as to, okay, everyone does agile now, development. And agile is very quick, and we do these thin slices of technology that we release to to our clients. And a lot of these thin slices aren't really the whole pie. We have a goal at the end to have this technology tool that's going to do 20 different things. Each slice that we come out with maybe has 2 or 3 pieces in it. And so if you're in at the early stages of that development process, you can embed compliance and legal and regulatory into each of those slices. And it makes for a better situation. I have some anecdotes that I can share if we want to go into those, but we have these, this, like I said, division that creates these different fintech technologies, and there have been a couple that we weren't in there at the beginning, and we had to, they wanted to go to the MVP, which is the point in the process which we call a minimum viable product, and test it out on clients. And the thing was giving recommendations. We didn't look at the kind of recommendations it was giving. We didn't understand the methodology behind the recommendations that it was providing. And so that was one of those few times we had to say, you got to hold on, and we've got to kind of revisit that. And you don't want to do that because these people have been working on this technology for a year. There's been a lot of money spent. And the last thing they want to hear is compliance and or legal, our partner in this, they said, we got to hold off. We can't do it. And we got to go back and go back to the drawing board. And so there have been a couple of those instances, but because we have developed this culture in the technology organization and across the board with risk and even to a certain extent some of the third line, we get invited now to those seats, and we have access to all the thinking from the beginning ideation phase. We are seen as a stakeholder. So I think that's the most important thing, whether you're developing it in-house or whether you're buying it, is, and I know you have some good anecdotes about being there when you're looking at different technologies to use in your business.
Yeah, here's an unofficial polling question. Have you ever had anyone come in and say, I purchased this technology on my credit card, and I'm just going to start using it, no problems, right? I don't see any other hands. Maybe, the fintech company here in the front, they have that. That is actually, we've had that before. And it's interesting from a technology perspective, we're often going to the business unit, really pushing on the innovation, saying, what do you need to do your jobs better? What things are you seeing out there? How do you want to aggregate the data? All of those different components. What we don't say is, please just buy something or please just start using something without it going through its proper due diligence. Because from a technology perspective, there's so much more that we have to think about in terms of data governance, information security, business continuity, all of those components that We don't want to be a, no, now you can't use that. We want to be a, yes, you can, and here are the other considerations. And by the way, have you also talked with our compliance team to make sure they're on board with it as well? And so I think, just really, again, we're going to keep saying stakeholders, partnerships, really being good partners with your business units and with your technology. Don't put your technology IT guys in a silo, because they are there to help as well.
The blessing in Melissa's scenario is that they actually came and asked. The more common is, I've done this, but I'm not telling anybody because I was trying to accomplish something, and I found it on the internet. It was cheap, it was easy, it accomplished my goal, and I was just doing my job. And you have no idea what you don't know. All of this stuff we generically call shadow IT. So when we talk about being at the table, part of being at the table is sometimes inviting yourself and inserting yourself into places and asking questions. We've had other panels and other content over this conference about protocols and policies and programs, but I'll tell you, being a good professional is often the informal. It's asking people, hey, what are you working on? Hey, do you see anything coming? Hey, if you see something, can you let me know? And that kind of walking around thing, keeping your pulse, or keeping a finger on the pulse of the firm, because it can be really hard to know what you don't know. Rich, I'm gonna come back to you. You made some little bit of talk about the nascent development stuff, but then also some of the mature. I'm presuming that you're a coding expert, and you're in the middle of writing code and evaluating code, so can you tell us about your technology prowess and your coding skills?
Zero. I expect it to work. That's really it. I mean, I can turn on this computer, and I can move my cursor around to make sure that the picture comes up, but I really don't know anything about it. I just know that we all want our technology to work, and we're making recommendations for clients, and when we're managing their money, it better work. And so one of the things, if we go back to having that seat at the table, that's important is, especially when you have a firm where you're building or you're kind of personalizing in some way, shape, or form, and you have IT people there, you can't assume that the coder or the technologist that you're working with knows the industry. There's so much movement in the IT space with technology, employees, taking the best next job for a little more money. They don't necessarily understand the concepts. They can execute on what you're asking them to do technically, but they may not understand that your firm doesn't do options, and they're programming some investment methodology to do options, or making connections to the SIBO or something like that. That's not something that they necessarily know about, and so you have to. One of the best things, the examples of having a seat at the table early is you can kind of suss out those people, and when people are asking questions in these phases of creating these big next things and the ideas, you can kind of get a sense of who you're working with. If there's somebody new in the house, you can kind of ask, hey, where'd you come from? And maybe they were making websites for flower shops or something before that, and that's a thing. You never know. So I think it's knowing who you're working with too, and being able to educate them. And in my experience, if you add value once in one of those situations, they're going to call you again, because you probably saved them a little bit, and you save them a lot of time and work, and so they start calling you, and they expect you to be there, and you're probably going to have more meetings, but it's going to be for the better.
That's an interesting point. Sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead, Chaos.
That's an interesting point, because I think about it too, just in terms of onboarding employees, and I know we're not talking about supervision of employees and things like that, but oftentimes in firms you'll have, here's your compliance training, here's the technology stack that you use, and this is how you use it, but really starting to think about how you marry those two together so that your new employees and even existing employees, as you roll out new technologies and develop additional things within that stack, that people really understand how they go together and why those two things are so important. why governance of technology and why compliance training is so important, and thinking about training your employees maybe a little bit differently than that siloed approach that we oftentimes take when we're onboarding new staff.
This is how you know you have good co-panelists, when they go right to say whatever you were going to say and they take the thought right out of your head. Everything that she said, but I'll now jump on one thing. Don't take that comment and just limit it to IT. Anybody that works in any operational function, HR, corporate finance, payroll, back office, they may know that they're following a process, but having a connection to that mission, that's one of the things that we really emphasize when we do our onboarding training, is we're not just here to make widgets. We actually have people that are relying on us. We're helping people to plan for retirement, or helping foundations to be able to accomplish their missions. We really try to have our ops people connected to what our mission is as an investment advisor. And again, we do that as compliance at orientation. It's not just, hey, have you seen the personal trading policy? It's, I want to bring you into our culture. That doesn't show up on a playbook anywhere, but that's part of the tone that we start at the very beginning. As Rich said, you help one person once, they come back to you, and that's where we start to sow some of those seeds and some of those relationships. You might not see that person again for 3 months, but they remember on their first day they met you, and they had a little bit of a connection, and those little connections can come back later and really benefit the kind of conversation you have when you're saying, hey, you're looking at this new thing, what does that do?
I mean, you can't assume, I mean, they don't teach the Advisors Act and the Investment Company Act in law school, much less to somebody that's learning, I don't know, coding. They just don't. So you just can't assume that they know everything that you live with every day. And you have to explain to them, what does a fiduciary duty mean? Why do we need certain disclosures? Why do you need to save on this page certain disclosures for me? Because I see websites, anything interfacing with the client, that's part of the technology we're talking about in all of this. It's not just the algorithms that are doing portfolio management or mapping questionnaires to investment recommendations and that sort of thing. It's the actual site too. And so sometimes you have to explain to them, well, the SEC requires disclosure where it counts. And I understand that this projection of performance over here, you know, it's really pretty and you think you like the way it looks, but we need a hover box, or we need something that says, these are just projections. And they don't understand why that is. They feel like, hey, this is a graph that's showing what this person's gonna make in the next 20 years, and it's not necessarily that, and we have to explain that. So that's another thing that you have to be aware of, that not everyone has the technical expertise that you do, especially people in the technology side, unless they've been there for a while, unless they've helped you build, unless they really know. But it's definitely something that I've experienced in multiple firms. And technology in the advice space, I think, has burgeoned with the digital advisors and those types of things, but it's been around for much longer than we've been paying attention to it. It's been around for years. There's been all of the different discount brokers, they've been online for how many years, and they're delivering some level of investment advice through those systems, and the trading, and there's algorithmic trading behind it. So I think it's nothing new, and we've been all working with technology in that way for probably a decade or more, decades.
So let's build on that. We've established that those kinds of things exist, where you have an algorithm that's pumping out results either to a client or to internal constituents that are helping them make decisions. Okay, so as a compliance program, those exist. What do you do to wrap your arms around those? What do you do to wrap your arms around mitigating the risks that might come from those? Just as a practical matter, what shows up on a test sheet in your compliance monitoring program?
So I'll start from the smaller firm perspective, and I think it alludes a little bit to what Rich had said earlier. You know, there was a new product, they went in, their team went in, and they did some testing, and they found out some issues. Not all firms have a compliance team of multiples that can go in and do that kind of testing. So we really take that trust but verify approach, right? So if we're implementing new technology and we're relying on the business units as the users of that, and the technology group from an implementation and kind of infrastructure structure of that, it's really going back as a compliance and looking at what are the risks that might exist here? What are kind of those unknown unknowns that the business unit might not be thinking about, that the technology team might not be thinking about, and then again, looking at, again, the partnership of how do we then go back and trust and verify what kind of testing do we want to develop for those business units to actually do, so that from a compliance perspective, you can come in and you can easily look at that. Maybe one person can take a look at that, pick a couple of different things and say, yes, this makes sense. And not necessarily in the traditional, if it's, we have 1,000 transactions, we have to pick 25 transactions and we have to go through and look at them. On a new implementation side, it's really understanding like security protocols. Where is the information being shared? How are we integrating amongst our other technology? Are there risk points? And asking those questions and then having that conversation with the people who are using it to be able to tell you, yes, this covers it, we're in control, we feel comfortable.
So, first big point that we made today, seat at the table, stakeholder. Second big point we're going to make today, testing. That I cannot underscore enough. If you're not doing adequate testing and you're not making sure that adequate testing is being done, then you must do so. There have been, I can tell you stories of hearing that, oh yeah, we've done testing, this happy path that we've created, that if everything goes right in a client's, with all the different APIs that are being plugged into this piece of technology, if all these things happen, then the right output comes out. And that's what we call the happy path. And when one little thing, whether it be a number or a mistake in coding or something happens that disrupts that happy path, chaos ensues. So
Fracture.
Or fracture.
one of them ensues, and I've seen it, and we have made sure that, and this is at many different firms that I have friends at and that I've experienced. You have to make sure that the people that are doing the technology development and testing are trying to test to break the systems. You're trying to throw things at it that it doesn't necessarily understand or expect. And only then will you understand the vulnerabilities. And so that's a big point that I wanted to make today, because the testing piece is key.
When the SEC comes in for an exam, are they content to talk to the compliance officer about the fancy technology tools?
Not generally.
Well, I'm not content in talking about it. I mean, I'll talk about it and I'll say I'll get you somebody to talk to. But we talk about that. We say, listen, you're going to have to explain to. We say that in multiple different aspects, not just the technology people get this speech, but we talk about the fact that, hey, you're going to need to support what you've done, and they're going to ask, why did this happen? Did you see this in testing? Where did this come from? And you're going to have to give them an adequate response. And so I think the trust but verify works. We do that with a lot of the technology that we have. Our programmers are supposed to go through a process when they're developing technology. And they're supposed to document the fact that they've done each of these things. And so they certify to us that they've done it. And then we have enough bandwidth. It's shrinking a little bit, our bandwidth, but enough bandwidth to go in and say, okay, you've said you've done these things. We're going to go into your notes and make sure that you've done them. And where there have been issues that you've identified in testing, we're going to check to see if you've remediated them. And so we'll do that on several of the key technologies that we have. Not everything. And it's another point. As you're thinking about how you're doing oversight of technology, not all firms have bandwidth to have several people that are dedicated to looking at different areas, or literally sitting with the technology people, reviewing their testing and helping them develop testing scenarios. Probably you don't have that. What you probably do have is an ability to inventory all the different technologies that you're using and figure out, what are the high-risk ones? What are the ones that have the biggest regulatory impact or could have the biggest client impact? And then from time to time, develop or design a program where you can look into those and make sure that they're working properly. Whether it's somebody in the technology area, or whether it's, I have somebody on my staff that we'll just periodically go into our digital advisor and see if it's working properly. Fill out or go through the game that we have to determine a risk assessment and see if it's mapping you to the right portfolio or the right recommendation. It's very easy. Documenting it, we've done it. It worked. So it can take many different flavors.
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You might be sitting here thinking, wow, I've got 100 other things on my plate, and this sounds really complicated, and it's more work, and this is all fancy, blah, blah, blah. Just listen to what Rich just told you. There's some basic things in there, but don't think that it has to be all or nothing, or it has to be gold-plated. Anything you do helps the case that you have when a regulator comes in to be able to show, yeah, we've been thoughtful about it. Could there have been more things that you could do? Yeah, probably. If you had more people, you could do more testing, whatever. But having a story to tell is better than having no story to tell, right? The other thing that I'll piggyback on in terms of just CCO diplomatics, you're not telling your IT folks that they are doing things for your benefit. What you're telling them is that this is a dry run with a friendly face before you get to the main event with a regulator at some point. I'd much rather find something at my level before a regulator, an auditor, a client points it out to me. So when I talk about testing or certifications or internal validations with my people, I use that rubric and say, look, I'm asking you, but I'm the easy one, right? Or maybe I'm not that easy, but I'm easy enough that this is a friendly audience because we're aligned here. When a regulator comes and you're sitting under the bright lights, hopefully all the questions that a regulator will ask you, you will have already asked and answered, and your IT people or other ops people, whoever, has already been through enough of a simulation that they're not freaked out. They've asked and answered those questions, and hopefully you have no surprises, or can limit the number of surprises that you have in an exam scenario. Let's pivot a little bit. Let's talk about the difference between internal and vendors. In our little poll, we saw some people do some internal things. We know that a lot of people use vendors as well. So when we talk a little bit about governance, talk a little bit about due diligence, oversight of the vendors, you want to?
Sure. Vendor due diligence is something that we take very seriously, not only just on an annual basis, but also when we're onboarding a new vendor. So we have a rubric that we've created, and again, it's the IT department in conjunction with the compliance department and the business unit to say, what are the key things that we need to look at? With the vendors that we're using, these are relatively known in the industry vendors. They often have SOC 1 reports, so we will take a look at that as a very basic, go through and really understand data governance. Who has our data? When do they sell our data? Do they sell our data? Do we own the data? How do we get the data back? What happens if there's a disruption? How does this actually work? What are kind of the up and down time service level agreements? All those kind of like basic things that you think about when you are bringing on new technology. Compliance is really taking a look at it from a legal perspective and understanding the agreement from that perspective. And then the business units are really understanding kind of how we're going to use this technology and implement this technology. We don't onboard, unless somebody bought it on their credit card and didn't tell us, we don't onboard technology without really this cohort of people that are taking a look at it to make sure that it makes sense, it's going to work, and we really understand it front to back.
You mentioned data. In the panel before, we were talking about ESG. If you're looking for an emerging area with small e of risk, that's a big one. Where is the data coming from? Where does it reside within your organization? Who has access to it? Who's governing it? Where is it secured? What are you using that data for? Are you using different sources across the organization for different groups for similar purposes? If your desk is using one data set to make decisions and you're using a different data set for client reporting, you might have a disconnect there. That's not necessarily a compliance issue per se, but one of the value adds that you can bring back to the horizontal perspective, you can identify because the people that you're working with might be in their own silos. They might not know. So having, again, that value add of being able to step in and say, you really should talk to you. And making those connections, that's a big part of what we can do as compliance professionals and add some value. Let me do another code word here before the afternoon slips off too far. The second code word is victory. Victory. We're going to declare victory over bad shadow IT. I'm going to ask another question. Either one of you can take it. There are other different types of things like SOC 1 type documents out there. Can you talk a little bit about how those can be useful either from vendors or within your own organizations?
I mean, I have had the privilege to go through a SOC 2 before, and I can't speak to our vendor management organization. I know that they use them. I know that they review them, but they're exhaustive, and whoever has gone through one of those types of audits knows that it's a process. It can take months, and I think that the firms that I've been at, we always required that a technology provider present that to us, whether it was qualified or unqualified. And on the ones that were qualified, if we wanted the technology badly enough, we would question those issues that were identified, make sure that they're on the path to remediation, and bring them in. But they're, I think, a very valuable tool, especially if you have a smaller organization, that you can say, hey, an independent party, and it's usually one of the big accounting firms that does these. I mean, the ones that I've worked on. They're an independent party that's gone into your firm and taken a look at what you guys do in terms of controls and data governance and all of those really important issues that are confronted by us in the technology area. So I think they're a very reliable tool. I don't think they're everything. I think that you still need to kick the tires. You can't just get a SOC 2 and go, okay, or a SOC 1 and go, okay, we're good. But I think that it's one of those things that if you have one of those, I think you can breathe, sleep a little bit better at night, in addition to the other things that you can do.
I'll also say from a technology perspective, one of the areas that we find fascinating is the user control considerations within that document. And we actually kind of look at it to say, okay, this is a level check. Do we feel comfortable with the controls that we have in place as it relates to this technology, that the risks that they have identified or the user control considerations that they have identified, we have covered? So if you haven't spent a lot of time looking at those, I encourage you to do so.
I want to piggyback one of the things that Rich said, and this is a broad lesson learned for compliance professionals. Note when he said they were talking to vendors, the answer wasn't absolutely do no business with somebody that doesn't have an internal controls report. It's a risk factor. So you identify it, and then you figure out how to address it. And the answer might be work with that vendor to see if they can produce one. Or it might be identify, make a business decision that you understand the risk, you're willing to accept the risk, or maybe they agree to undertake in the future, those kind of things. But the answer is typically not no. The answer is, okay, now I understand better the landscape, and let's figure out how to mitigate or address those risks. We've also been talking a little bit about this from a regulatory perspective or just from our own sanity perspective. But the other layer we really haven't talked an awful lot about is from the commercial perspective. You have clients that are asking due diligence questions. For those of you that fill out RFPs to pitch for business, it's not uncommon for clients to ask, tell me about do you have a SOC type report? Tell me about your vendor management oversight process. Do you look at your vendor SOC 2s or SOC 1s or whatever it is? So part of this is driven from a regulatory expectation, but there's no question that commercial considerations are a part of this. Not every advisor has a SOC 1, for example. In my business, if we didn't have a SOC 1, we would probably be out of business. But that's my business. I deal with institutions. So that's one of those commercial things, and it's a major undertaking. It's an absolutely major undertaking and a major expense. But if you have it, you might as well leverage on it. So there are things that it's kind of making a virtue of necessity type of a thing. If you got it, that gives you gives you knowledge. If you've got one for your own organization, it gives you knowledge and comfort that somebody else has kicked your organization's tires. If you're looking at one from a vendor, you have more knowledge about how to read theirs and how they've organized their own world too. So there's a couple of different frameworks and benefits. We had a panel yesterday, we talked about compliance programs and annual testing. The SOC type documents are something that I look at and I try to piggyback on. I don't want to duplicate effort. If somebody else is already digging into things along that trade flow and it's already in there, done. If there's no exceptions, declare victory and move on, right? So it's trying to think about when resources are limited, what other opportunities you have within your organization to make your lives easier and more effective as well.
I think one thing I would add to that too is you bring up institutional clients and RFPs, RFIs, and to the extent that you may have a marketing department that fills those out, I would say, make sure that when they are answering questions as it relates to vendor management, vendor due diligence, cybersecurity, BCP, all of those things that have a compliance bent to it, and they're not running them by the technology department on a regular basis, plug for IT, have those folks take a look at it too, just to make sure that the answers are still applicable and that it makes sense. Again, you want to make sure that there's consistency and that if we're setting ourselves up to say this is what we do, that there is an understanding from the technology perspective that this is what the technology does and this is how we manage that and govern that.
Or not have your marketing department do
Or
this.
not have your marketing department do those.
So I think all of this is we're talking about supervision of technology, and vendors are part of the oversight that I think regulators expect you to be doing over your technology, whether it's your home cooked technology, whether it's vendors providing it to you. But I wanted to make the point that I think the 2017 robo-guidance is applicable here, just to get in the head of what the SEC is thinking about. And they all but, well, they didn't require it, they strongly urged firms to have compliance programs that include technology oversight. They were speaking about algorithms specifically because digital advisors use algorithms to trade and to provide recommendations and that sort of thing. But to me, it's kind of broadly applicable to any technology that any firm is using. Because if you look at I think the AXA, the enforcement action, that was an anti-fraud provision case. It wasn't related to not overseeing technology. It wasn't, oh, you had policy, you didn't have policies and procedures and you didn't do what you were supposed to be doing. It was, you said in your brochure that you were going to do something. Because of this lapse in oversight, you didn't do it, and so you were telling clients something that you weren't doing, and that's how they got AXA on that one. So I think if you're a digital advisor, I'll tell you, you need compliance policies and procedures. You need to do oversight of your technology. You need to be very highly involved in testing. But whatever you're doing from a technology standpoint, it should be part of your compliance program. It should be written down. You should have that part of your annual review process. And whatever you can do, do it. If it's just a little bit, like we talked about earlier, that's fine. But make sure that that risk-based mindset is embedded in the compliance program, and make sure that you're addressing it. Because I think that it's probably not going to be a rule like the cybersecurity rule that we talked about yesterday, where there was a little spot between Reg SP and Reg SID that they needed to plug. Maybe the digital engagement piece that they're coming out with, I think, is going to fill that hole. I don't know. It's going to be a rule, but not necessarily requiring compliance programs. But I think that it's on their radar, and it's something that they may not necessarily say, you didn't test for this, you didn't, you weren't sitting at the table advising, but they will use that as a factor if something doesn't go right, and it will be noted, and you'll probably get a deficiency for it.
And I'm sure that your legal department would be happy if you had a little more argument to be able to defend against a negligence standard type of a thing in a civil lawsuit if you ever got into a position where an unhappy client were to sue you because you had some sort of a problem in their account, your investment agreement, and they're going to come and say, well, of course, a reasonably prudent investment advisor would have had a procedure to handle this kind of risk, wouldn't they? Mm. So those kind of things can be helpful.
And I think when you're using technology, it's because you want to scale your business.
Yeah.
And so it's not a mom and pop advisor that's doing everything maybe by hand, manually. So when you're using technology, the issues that are going to happen with your portfolio management system, it's not going to affect just one client. It'll probably affect a broad swath of your clients. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to reach out to those clients. You're going to have to make it right for them. Who knows? There could be some complaints involved. Those get to the regulator. You might have a problem then. And so,
I'm going to use the last 5 minutes. I'm going to ask each of my co-panelists to talk about technology that they use in their own worlds to help them do their jobs. We've talked a little bit about technology that other parts of the business are coming up with or developing or devising for various reasons. You think of good examples in the compliance world where you might have been able to use technology for email supervision or trade blotter reviews or personal trading monitoring. We talked a little bit about defense and offense. That's got blends of both. So think about from a compliance program user, can you give examples of compliance tools that are technology enabled?
I mean, we have call supervision systems that can identify different words and things for us to provide oversight for our advisors. For us, we don't use necessarily many tools in our day-to-day. We leverage the tools that the technology groups are using, and we help them with their testing. So when I say we have a seat at the table, we really do. And we help them create different scenarios for testing and those sorts of things. And then because we're there, we can document the output of that. And so we document it in a more manual way. It's on an Excel spreadsheet, really, but at least we have it. But our area is so it's very digital in nature, and so we don't have the expertise. I remember there was a sweep that I was involved in the SEC Examiner, SCCO. Do you guys have coders on staff in your department? And my friend said, no. Do we need to have coders on staff? And the examiner said, I don't know, do you? And so we don't want to get to that point, although it is in the back of my mind to have somebody, and I know that one of a future ask of mine will be to have some type of quant or somebody that can take data in and review it and provide reports, but it's on the horizon.
Yeah, I say data analytics in general, to have more tools, more capability to be able to digest and analyze data. The other thing that you just said that made me think we should also emphasize, we could talk for another hour about who actually owns the technology and roles and responsibilities. The example you gave of it's theirs, but you were able to piggyback on theirs, that's one route, but there's other technologies that, in the compliance department, you may be the business owner. So understanding who actually owns it, but you might have some different, I'm stealing your thunder because this is your question. But you might have a difference between who's actually doing the development and who needs to be the user, and governance and some of those differences of roles and responsibilities, and that matrix may differ application to application.
Well said. Couldn't have said that better if I would have said that myself.
You stole my answer before, so I get to steal yours now. That's how it works.
Well,
Moderator privilege.
I think you said it in the prep. I think that's when he was taking the notes.
There you go.
I think so.
Yeah. But there's no plagiarism in panels, so it's all good. We'll wrap it up here. I think that if you haven't picked it up already, obviously the key takeaways here really are get integrated into your business. Do whatever it takes to either get invited or invite yourself to the table. Keep your finger on the pulse of the technology stack that your firm is using. Again, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Do testing, do inventories, put together a spreadsheet. Give yourself a story to tell if the SEC asks you, how do you know what's going on in your shop? And then do some reasonable poking, prodding testing. Again, if you've got more resources, if you've got more complicated business, if you've got more risks, then you probably should be doing more testing. But the testing doesn't all have to be rocket science or brain surgery. Some of it, like Rich said, go to the thing that your client sees and try to simulate a client experience, and see if it's good information in but garbage out. That's an easy test step to document and say, I've done that every quarter. And you don't have to have a coding background to be able to do it, to know that it spat out something that was gibberish. So those kind of takeaways The other thing that I'll add on top of that is these are things that we've articulated in the context of technology and compliance, but these are lessons you can apply more broadly across your organizations. We talked earlier about the diplomacy with folks that may not have a lot of experience working with an investment advisor. That's generally applicable. So take those kind of pragmatic keys away and implement them across your organization. So with that, right on time. Thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.